Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls Online build video with me, Sherman. Today I bring you guys the Shadow Knight tank. The Shadow Knight tank is a Nightblade Argonian tank. I know, sounds crazy, but it is. And the reason I chose the Argonian particularly for this build isn't for the potion passive actually. It was for the Magicka passive that it has in its racial bonuses. It has a 3% Magicka bonus. So that on top of the Nightblade's 8% Magicka bonus really gives us the pools we need for this build to work viably and to work effectively. So that's kind of why I put it together the way I did. This is an off tank. This isn't a main tank at all, except for in dungeons. And it can main tank most dungeons, not all of them. Some of the DLC dungeons will be pretty difficult to tank, but it can be done if you are skilled enough to play this type of build. So let's go ahead and get in and take a look at it. So starting with our stats, you can see we have 19,000 Magicka with a 33,000 health, 30k stamina. We do have 1,011 magic recovery, which is perfect for this build. We also have a 2,048 weapon damage with a 33% weapon critical. You don't need a lot of crit for this build, but it does help a little bit. We have a 20,000 spell resist with a 19,000 physical. I know it seems low, but don't worry, you do make up a lot of your resistances with the sets you're using. So moving on down, you can see we have the Tower of Mundus Stone. This gives us extra max stamina, which we need, the extra stamina. We also get minor vitality on the front bar because of Swallow Soul, one of the abilities we have on our bar. And then we also have increased primary all stats. So we are using tri-stat food. Going over here, as you can see, we are using the Longfin Pasty with melon sauce food. This gives us a good amount of tri-stat bonus, so it increases all of our stats, our max health, magicka, and stamina, which is perfect. Next, we are using the Crown Store tri-stat potions. You can use it's better to use the crafted potions, tri-stat potions, because they give you more back in resources. But unfortunately, I'm on PTS, so. Alright, now looking over the gear sets, we are using Lord Warden. And the reason we're using Lord Warden is because it gives us a good amount of resistances for ourselves, but it also helps out our group by applying a resistance buff to them as well. And it lasts for 10 seconds and it can be reapplied every 10 seconds. So as soon as it comes off cooldown, it will be back up. It usually never stays off cooldown when you're in combat. The other set we're using here is Gladiators. Again, just like the DK, we are using the Gladiator set because we can get away with using Gladiators, Hunting's Rage. We don't really need Night Mother's Gaze to apply Major Fracture because we have abilities that can do it for us, and our abilities actually last longer on this build than they do on other ones. So next up, we are using Plague Doctors again. Remember, we're an off tank. We don't need Ebon Armor to give our group extra health because the main tank will most likely be doing that. So having this on your off tank can really help. And in a dungeon, it doesn't matter because dungeons are a lot different. So yeah. Alright, on the traits on the armor, we are using 3 infused, just like always. And on the smaller pieces, we're using Nirnhoned reinforced. Nirnhoned on the gauntlets and the belt, and that's because their resistances are really low to begin with. And the belt is light with a medium helm. But we're using reinforced on the shoulders and the boots because that's going to give us more resistances. Because when you play a two-handed tank, it's not so much about blocking as it is about just surviving through the damage. So you want to have high damage mitigation stuff. So high damage reduction, high resistances to make sure that you mitigate a lot of damage. Also, you want high healing received. And that's another reason why I chose the Argonian specifically for this build, because being a Nightblade, you don't have your own damage shield. Now, you can use Bone Shield, but you would have to give up a skill on your bar, and you need all the skills you have. Alright, moving on to the jewelry. We are using 2 Trirune with weapon damage enchants, and 1 infused with a magic recovery. That's how come our magic recovery is so high too, is because when we're a Nightblade, we get 15% magic recovery, stamina recovery, and health recovery. So that extra health recovery really, or magic recovery, really plays well with this. Moving on to the weapons, we are using a 2-handed sword with a bow, both with Crusher enchants, and both of them can help you keep Crusher applied pretty much non-stop, which is really good. So that's the gear, the traits. On the gear itself, though, we have 3 Trirune, and the rest are stamina. On the smaller pieces, 4 stamina, and then 3 Trirune. You don't need a lot of Trirune with this, so going with the extra stamina helps you out. It helps you save stamina resources, or allows you for a bigger stamina pool, so that way you can effectively use all of it. Alright, so moving on to the skills. Remember, with all classes, make sure you fill out all your class passives, so that way you have access to the benefits from them. Also on your weapons, make sure you get the passives. And then on your armor, light armor, you're going to want the top 3 passives, because even though this is magic recovery and this is reduced cost, and the reduced cost isn't much, it still helps. This also gives you extra spell resist. Medium armor, you're going to want the top 2 and the bottom one. The reason you're going to want this is this is going to give you a little bit more weapon critical. This is going to give you a little bit of stamina recovery and reduced stamina cost. And down here, this is going to give you that movement bonus, and it's going to give you the dodge roll bonus. So it's kind of important to have that one, especially on a tank. Heavy armor, all of them, you want them all because of the benefits it gives you. Moving on to the world skills, soul magic, you don't really need these, but I like to take them. On the guilds, Fighters Guild, get them all. Even though you're not using any Fighters Guild abilities, you never know if you might need one, like Silver Bolts, or sorry, the Silver Leash. You might need this for some dungeons, so you can swap this out with other abilities. And then on top of that, you don't always need this, so you can also use the Dawnbreaker if you want to use it for extra DPS. Depending on the dungeon, if it's like one of the earlier dungeons that came out with the game, with the base game, some of those dungeons you don't really need a lot of survivability, as you do bringing a little bit of extra damage. Onto the Mages Guild, you only need Persuasive Will, and that's only for questing. Psijic Order, you want to get all the passives because you are using the Crushing Weapon Psijic Order ability for maintaining a damage shield that it can give you from the Concentrated Barrier. Also, you do get Deliberation when you activate it, so you do get 30% damage reduction for a split second. Next up, we have Undaunted. Want both the passives. And then onto the racials. I want to go over the racials real quick. So, you want to make sure that you get all the racials, especially, like I said, this one, because you want that 3% max magicka, you want the 9% max health. The poison disease immunity or resistance really plays well with this too. And then down here, this one gives you the healing done and healing received. Because we are using Plague Doctors, we get a 4% healing received. So we get another 5% from this, and then a lot of our CP plays into this as well. Moving on, Alchemy, you're going to want to get Medicinal Use, and then Provisioning, Gourmand, and Connoisseur. These aren't necessary, but they do help. Alright, so let's go over the skills on a bar, and a lot of people are going to wonder why I have certain skills on my bar the way I do, and I'll explain. So starting with the first one, we are using Ambush. Now, we're not using Ambush to get the Empower, we're using it to get to our targets fast. Because we are a tank, we want to be able to move around to targets, so we can apply Taunt to them, or to apply the Crusher enchant, or the Crusher, or the Major Fracture. So this allows us to do that effectively. Next up, we have Crushing Weapon. You're not going to be using this a whole lot unless you want to do a lot of extra damage while you're solo playing in the open world. Otherwise, you're not going to be using it that often. It's here just for the damage shield bonus. The next ability we have is Surprise Attack. Now this is where we're going to get that Major Fracture we're going to be able to apply to our enemies, and as you can see, it lasts for 17 seconds. So we're going to be able to apply this to multiple targets, because it doesn't just apply to the one you hit it with. You can hit multiple targets with it and apply that major fracture of multiples to get that greater damage output for your group. This works really good in trash fights. It works really good against bosses because you can apply this every 17 seconds, helping your stamina DPS get more DPS. Now, a lot of people are going to ask, why aren't you using the sword and board? This particular build, I didn't want to use sword and board. I wanted to try something new. So I tried this, and it works out really, really well. So next, we have Brawler. Brawler is here for the damage shield that it applies to us. It lasts for it's 8-second damage shield. It's 2,183, but it's increased for each enemy hit by 100%. So if it's only one enemy, you're going to get a 4K shield. If it's two enemies, you're going to get an 6K shield. And if it's 3 enemies, you're going to get an 8K shield. 4 enemies, you're going to get a 10K. And it's going to grow. The more enemies you hit, the more powerful it becomes. Moving on. Next ability on our bar is Swallow Soul. I mentioned this in the beginning. The reason we have this here is it's a nice heal. It does a decent amount of damage too, but it's a nice heal. And it gives us minor vitality at all times, increasing our healing received by 8%. We don't really need it because we do get something very similar over here. But this is its own. This isn't vitality. This is its own 8% healing received. This adds another 8%. Then you add in the 5% for being an Argonian, the 4% for wearing Plague Doctors, and then the extra that we're going to get from our CP, another 5%. We get a lot of healing received with this build. Because we don't have a lot of damage shields, we needed that healing received to compensate. The next ability we have on our bar is one we will use a lot in dungeons, and that is Bolstering Darkness. The reason we're going to be using this a lot in dungeons is because in dungeons you're not going to be using Warhorn as often, except for boss encounters, but like on trash fights or minor bosses, things you know that you can kill pretty easily, you can use this instead to help mitigate damage on you and your allies. This also protects you from a lot of the damage that's going to be incoming on you, and it's going to make that healing received even better. Moving on to the back bar. On the back bar, we do have our taunt, Inner Beast, and we are using a bow on the back bar. So the reason I chose Inner Beast to go on the back bar instead of the front bar is because this way we can apply this and then switch to our front bar, use our abilities on our front bar, and then flip back and reapply this. We can just keep this up. Mainly on boss encounters is where you're going to keep this up the most. If you're in a trial, though, if you're tanking something while the main tank is tanking something else, you have a way to taunt them and keep them on you. But you also have the ability to do other things. This is also a synergy, so it also helps your group with having an extra synergy. It doesn't proc all the time, but it does proc enough that you can keep it up and keep the synergy active. Next ability on our bar is Endless Hail. This is just pretty much here for damage and applying the Crusher enchant. Next ability on our bar is Dark Cloak. This is a heal, and I use this pretty much for an oh crap heal. Because on the front bar, I do have Swallow Soul, so I'm going to be using this most of the time to keep a tick heal on me. I'm only going to use this if I need health badly. Next on our bar is a skill that a lot of tanks do use with the Nightblade, and that is Mirage. This one surrounds you in a phantasmic aura to gain major evasion, minor resolve, and minor ward. The major evasion basically allows you to have a 15% chance to dodge attacks without dodge rolling, and it also gives you that minor ward and minor resolve, which gives you 13/20 spell and physical resistance. So if you look, when you cast this, if you look now, we have a 21k spell and physical resistance. When we use our other ability, like Dark Cloak, with it, we go up to 26,000. So we actually have a decent resistance pool, enough to get by most content, but we also get a lot of healing received. So it's kind of a trade-off, a compensation, if you will. Next ability we have on our bar is Leeching Strikes. We have this here not just for the stamina return, but for the healing that it does for us. all of our light and heavy attacks will heal us. So, and every light and heavy attacks will restore a certain amount of stamina. When you reactivate this, though, it will give you a big chunk of stamina, 4,270, if you wait until the timer is almost done. Next on our bar is Aggressive Warhorn. Like all tanks, we do use Aggressive Warhorn, but we're not using it as often unless we're in a trial. So max magicka, max stamina, minor toughness, increasing all three of our stats by 10% for 30 seconds. And then on top of that, it gives us minor or major force, increasing critical damage done by 15% for 9.5 seconds. Now, I'm going to just show you guys what I mean by the reason why I like this build so much. One, when you do your taunt and your Endless Hail, like I said, they will apply, like Endless Hail will apply Crusher. Then when you swap to the front bar, you can just sit here and just pretty much do what you need to. Swap back to the back bar, get your taunt back up, get your Mirage up. You don't need to use your Teleport Strike a lot. It's mainly, you're going to be using this ability here and the Brawler, and then you're going to use Taunt and Mirage mostly besides this when you have it going. And the Leeching Strikes is also really good, like I said, because it will help you with resources. But it also gives you a way of getting extra stuff back. So as you can see, I can do some heavy attacks. I'm going to get a decent amount back of resources. And the only time you want to use Endless Hail, or you want to use certain abilities, is if you have the stamina to use it. So most of the time, you're just going to be using the surprise attack thing, Brawler, Funnel Health, this, and your taunt, and Endless Hail. So you're going to be keeping up quite a few stamina abilities, but mainly you have this here if you need to heal yourself in one of those oh crap moments, like I said. So, and that's why we want that big stamina pool, is because there's going to be times where you're going to be using this like 2 or 3 times in a row. So, but that is the build itself. Let's go ahead and take a look at the CP. And just like with all my other builds I've released this time, we have a pattern. We have 66 in the Ironclad. This reduces damage taken from direct damage attacks by 22%. Moving on to the middle red tree, we have 56 in the Hardy, reducing physical poison disease damage by 12%. Whenever you use Dark Cloak, by the way, you also get 3 seconds of damage reduction, 8% damage reduction, which stacks with both Elemental Defender and Hardy. So you actually go to a 20% damage reduction. Like I said, playing a two-handed tank versus, or a staff tank versus a sword and board tank. Sword and board tanks, you can block a lot more attacks, but with these kind of tanks, you need more damage reduction and more resistances to make them worthwhile. So we have 56 in Elemental Defender. This reduces Flame, Frost, Shock, and Magic damage by 12%. And then we have 23 into Thick Skin. This reduces damage taken from damage over time effects by 10%. Moving on to the last red tree, we have 40 into Bastion. This increases effectiveness of damage shields by 16%. Some people will say you don't really need this because Brawler will still work effectively, but it doesn't. You still need these points here. We also have 19 into Quick Recovery. This gives us an increased healing received. Like I said, we are an Agonian, so we actually have 10% healing received, and then you add the 4%, then the 16 on top of that. So we go from 8 to 12 with 16. We actually go to 28% healing received. It's pretty crazy. Moving on, we have 56 in the green tree, the first one in the green tree, and Warlord. And this reduces our break free cost by 20%. You really need those reduced break free costs because you saw how much stamina we were using. This doesn't use a lot to break free. Next up, we have 13 into Sprinter. This reduces our sprint cost by 8%. 23 into Bashing Focus. This reduces our bashing costs by 14%. Also really beneficial for us. And then moving on to the next one, we have 43 into Arcanist. This increases magic recovery. Because we get most of our resources back from heavy attacks, we don't need anything in Mooncalf. We need it in Arcanist. And then we have 43 into Tenacity, which increases our stamina return of our fully charged heavy attacks by 10%. So wearing heavy armor, you get a 25% stamina return on your fully charged heavy attacks. with this 10% makes it 35%. And then when you add the 30% base, we go to a 65% return. Moving on over here, we have 56 in the Shadow Ward. This reduces our block cost because we do still block attacks, just not all of them, just the major ones. So we will still take a big chunk of damage from those, but not as much because we can reduce the block cost, but we also can block and, you know, base 10% of the incoming damage with any weapon. Next up, we have 26 in the Tumbling, reducing our dodge roll cost by 11%. It's actually 15% because we have 4% from the medium armor passive. So we have a 15% reduced dodge roll cost, which saves us, again, stamina. Moving on to the blue tree. First in the blue tree is Blessed. We are using this to increase our healing done. So we have 43 in here. This increases it by 10%, so we get better heals from our character. Next up, we have 40 in the Master at Arms. This increases your damage done with direct damage by 16%. We also unlock Reposit, which allows us to block attacks, and whenever we do, we can redirect some of that damage back to our enemies on a 15% chance. It doesn't happen too often, but enough to make a difference. Next up, we have Retaliation. Whenever you block a heavy attack, your next light attack used within 7 seconds is increased by 30%. And if you do your timing right, and do this along with buffing yourself with the imbue weapon or crushing weapon, you can do that and you'll get an extra 30% on the light attack damage from it, and then the imbue weapon will go off, or the crushing weapon will go off and do extra damage. Moving on, we have 43 in a Mighty. This increases physical, poison, and disease damage. Most of our attacks damage is done physically, so getting that extra 10% can help. We have 56 in the Thaumaturge. We only have this here for Brawler and Endless Hail. Next up, we have 66 in the Precise Strikes. We have this here for the critical healing. But we're not critical healing except for on our Leeching Strikes. The other ones cannot critically heal us. Our other heal cannot critically heal us, and neither can the Dark Cloak, because those are Magicka based. If you wanted to, you could take the 56 out of here and put it into Elfborn if you want to make those Magicka heals a little better. And then we have 12 in the Precise Strikes. This increases our physical penetration by 1191, which is kind of beneficial because it increases our damage output. Alright, so that is that. Now, of course, like always, I'm going to take this into one of the trials and show you guys how effective it can be. And the reason I use Maw of Lorcage is because the first room you get attacked by about 8 enemies right away. And then you get attacked by 3 minor, I call them mini bosses, but they're more like mini or elite mobs. So and if any of you are asking, I'm using the Assassin's Guild look for everything. Sword, bow, all my armor. Like I said, if you watch this Brawler, that's a 12k damage shield with all these guys around me. I didn't need to do that, but I just went ahead and did it anyways. And I love using heavy attacks on the two-handed because also, just so you know, any light attacks you do with the two-handed and the heavy attacks hits multiple targets, and it can give you a chance of applying pressure to them. So it doesn't always apply pressure, but it can. So I was lucky this time. I got all melee, no magic types, so. I'm gonna go ahead and kill this guy off. But like I said, the mitigation, because we have the one thing up, and then you put on this, and then when you get the other thing, you actually go to 29k, or just about 30k, on your resistances because of Lord Warden, so. Now I'm going to go ahead and see how well I can do against these guys. I haven't tested this here yet, so this will be good. Like, tested it with this, so I can find out now. Like I said, there's going to be times where you're going to be using that multiple times. And I haven't even used a potion. If I use a potion on my Argonia, I'm going to get a ton of resources back. So it's kind of a benefit there. I'm going to let him go ahead and kill me. But as you can see, it does work out really well. When you're in a group, these things just melt anyways. So, and again, just like with all the builds I've released so far for Wolfhunter, these builds are made to work in groups. So they do work really well in groups, but they also work really well when you're trying to play content like the quests and stuff like that, and they help you out. So they work in both environments really, really well. So both PvE, dungeons, trials, you name it. For dungeons, like I said, you can main tank most, if not all, normal dungeons and trials. You can main tanks to a degree. But in veteran mode, you can only maintain most of the dungeons. And I say most. There's like 3 that's really hard to tank with this. And then I don't know too much about the 2 new dungeons yet, because I haven't had a chance to get in and test them. But I will say with all the older dungeons, any dungeon before this, so Horns of the Rage, Dragon Moans, you name it, this is a viable build. And it does have a little trouble in some of those dungeons main tanking, but it can be done. And then just like with the trials, most of the trials can be done as an off tank in both normal, like main tank and normal on some of them, most of them, off tank in all of them. So that's why I put together this build the way I did, is so that it can work in both environments, and it's still a viable option. But that is unfortunately it for this video, guys. So if you guys like this build and want to see more builds like this, you can hit that like button. If you guys want to, again, like I said, see more builds like this or more videos by me, you can hit that subscribe button. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day, and this guy might see you in game. Bye.